This is the first Gaudete Sunday at Christ the King that I haven't worn the truly flamboyant vestment because I thought Father Prince had stolen it. It was only after I put on this rather conservative rose vestment, not pink, rose, only after I put on this that I saw the flamboyant one, but I was too lazy to change. So if you want to see the flamboyant one, come tomorrow at 11, and I'll be there in all my splendor. Today on this third Sunday of Advent, Gaudete Sunday, we have the second most important person of the Advent season make his appearance, John the Baptist. John was the last of the prophets, and by the very role that he was called to by God, the greatest of the prophets. Because to John alone it was given to point out and say, there is the Lamb of God. He didn't call him the Messiah. He calls him the Lamb of God, which is a reference to the sacrifice that Jesus would make for our salvation. The people were reaching fever pitch with expectation. They knew the Messiah was coming. They had a very confused notion of what the Messiah would do. Most people thought that he would be a political leader, and especially that he would overthrow the yoke of the Roman oppressors, that he would reestablish the kingdom of David and ensure the political stability of Israel. Well, they were right about certain aspects of it. He did, in fact, reestablish the kingdom of David and brought it to its fulfillment in the kingdom of Christ, but not at all in the way they envisioned. And so spontaneously, they asked John, in light of the salvation that is to come, what are we to do? How do we prepare for this? What does God expect of us? And John's answer to them really is very simple. He said, do whatever you are doing, but do it well and do it with integrity. And be kind to those who are in need. So if you have a surplus of clothing, share your clothing with those who lack it. If you have a surplus of food, share your food. How you treat your neighbor is how you treat your God. And then it's very interesting because there are two classes of people who come up to him: tax collectors and soldiers. In the other Gospels, particularly the Gospel of Matthew, tax collectors and soldiers are not portrayed very well. In fact, to be a tax collector was the equivalent of being a sinner. That was because of the peculiar way the taxes were collected in ancient Israel. The Roman officials would establish a quota that from this section of Jerusalem, for example, they wanted 5,000 sesterces. And they would hire these tax collectors, most of whom, in fact, were not Roman at all. They were Jewish. And they would collect the taxes. Well, instead of the 5,000 that the Romans demanded, they would extort 10,000 from the people and pocket 5 of them. And that was okay with the Romans. In other words, tax collectors came to be associated with liars and cheats. And they were held in about the same amount of respect that in our society we would hold those who push drugs to children. They were despised. But not in Luke's gospel. Luke does not condemn tax collectors, but what he does say to them is, be honest. Don't collect more than is required. The same thing with soldiers. The soldiers were one of two types. They were either Roman soldiers, pagans, who were the instruments of oppression to the people, or they were soldiers of the Tetrarch Herod, the one who was to put John the Baptist to death eventually. And again, they were not very highly thought of, as you can imagine. Luke does not condemn them. He says, don't abuse people. Don't abuse your authority. Don't oppress people. And be satisfied with the wages you're paid. Don't be greedy. In other words, that every person there has a way to spiritually prepare for the coming of the Messiah. And that comes down to us in our day and in our time. What do we do to prepare for the coming of Christ? What do we do to prepare for the renewal of Christ's presence in our lives and in our hearts? And basically, John's message to us is exactly the same. What you're doing, do well. Do with integrity. Do with compassion. Do with kindness. Don't do it out of selfishness. Don't do it out of greed. Don't do it out of lust. Don't do it out of self-gain. But rather, use the gifts you have been given for the good of other people. And that's one of the great, great secrets of our Christian faith, isn't it? That every one of us have been gifted by God in one way or another. But the secret is, the gifts that God gives us are not primarily for our benefit. They're for the benefit of other people. And the great, beautiful example of that, maybe the most outstanding example, is in the musical composer Beethoven. Beethoven wrote some of the most beautiful music Western civilization has ever produced. And one of his greatest works, the Ninth Symphony. And in the Ninth Symphony, you have the choral Ode to Joy. When that symphony was first produced, Beethoven was as deaf as a doornail. He couldn't hear his own music. And he was in despair that it would not be well respected. And so after that magnificent Ode to Joy chorus was finished, and people were going wild with their applause, they were so moved. Beethoven was slumped down over the conductor's stand in deep, deep despair, thinking that it had been a failure. And one of the people in the orchestra had to go behind him, pick him up by his hair, and turn him around so that he could see the reaction of the people. Because what he had been given, the tremendous, awesome gift he had been given, was not for his own benefit, not for his own enjoyment, but for the benefit of hundreds and thousands and millions of people who lived not only in his age, but in every age since. That is a beautiful example of an extraordinary, gifted man whose gift was used not for his own happiness, not for his own benefit, not even for his own enjoyment, but for the benefit and the happiness and the enjoyment of other people. And so that fits very beautifully into what John told the people 2,000 years ago as they waited for the Messiah. and what John calls us to today. Be the best that you can be. If you're called to the married state, be the best spouse you can be. And one of the things, it's interesting, when you hear confessions, a lot of times when a couple comes in and they have been, or one of the spouses comes in, they've been married for years and years and years and years. They have long since learned all of the faults and the buttons of their spouse, and they know just how to push them at the right time to get a reaction of their spouse, and the same thing with their spouse. They end up, they're both retired, the man is home, getting under his wife's feet, getting in her way, annoying her, and he is annoyed by her. Right? There's a very simple way of doing that, and I very often assign this as a penance. Each and every day, those spouses who know each other so well, who love each other, but also get on each other's nerves, that each one of them should think and do some planning. What can I do this day to make my wife or my husband's day a little happier? What can I say? What can I do, to show my love? And it doesn't have to be anything great and flamboyant, but something very simple, an act of consideration, an act of kindness, an act of reaching out. And then you can spend the rest of the day getting on each other's nerves. But as long as there's that one little act of what can I do to make my spouse's day a little better, that's exactly the type of thing that John is talking about. How do we prepare for the coming of the Messiah? How do you prepare for the coming of the Messiah? We're in a season of great preparation, aren't we? We have trees to decorate, lights to put up, cookies to bake, cards to write, presents to wrap, etc., 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 etc. But spiritually, how do we prepare? If we listen to the world, Christmas is all about spending money. It's all about getting things. Or, at best, about giving things. But it's far more than that, isn't it? How do we prepare for the coming of Christ? And it's not in lights and all the other preparations we do, but it's in what is in the inside, what attitude we bring, how we renew our love and our commitment to those around us. Got it? Good.